Welcome to Learning to Glow, a show about wellness, skin health, and self-development. I'm your host, Jess. I'm a mom, entrepreneur, and skincare expert. I'm so excited to share tips on how to achieve healthy skin and bring amazing guests in the field of health, fitness, aging gracefully, and personal growth. Let's explore all different ways we can take care of ourselves as women, both inside and out, to truly shine. So let's get glowing. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. I'm so happy you're here. I love our guest that I'm going to be sharing with you. She is so incredibly knowledgeable. She is Kristin Kirkpatrick with the Cleveland Clinic, and we are talking about what really matters when it comes to protecting our brain, maintaining muscle, and supporting our bones, especially as estrogen starts to decline. And we talk a lot about Alzheimer's, the risks starting decades before you even see symptoms, what kind of nutrition actually supports your brain long term, and simple habits that can make a huge difference. We also get into omega-3s, creatine, which is really interesting for women. This is all from a woman's perspective, all of the data that she shares, all of the studies, all of the information, and what you should actually be paying attention to when it comes to supplements in general. There's so many great practical tips here too, and examples of what we could be adding into our life with as far as nutrition, movement, all of those things. So it's very practical, very doable, and it just makes you feel more in control of your health, no matter where you're at currently. Kristin is amazing. She's so much experience in her field, and she shares her knowledge with her patients and outlets like the Today Show. She's totally a pro, and she knows how to break these topics down in a way that is really easy to understand. I loved her. I took a lot of notes in this episode. Please share this with a friend and check out her website in my show notes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our show today. And Kristin, thank you so much for being a guest on our show.
Jess, I'm so excited. I've been waiting for this. So all the thanks goes to you.
Thank you. Okay. I'm very excited to talk to you. We're going to talk about women's health today. I'd love to talk about the brain and muscles and all of those good things. But before we go there, please introduce yourself and tell us what you do, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a registered dietitian. I've been at the Cleveland Clinic in integrative and lifestyle medicine for 23 years. My primary goal is to see women. Postmenopausal is always ideal for me, or definitely 40 and above. Just exactly what you're talking about every day, right? Just to really kind of get into some of the nuances and the changes and challenges that we have as women. So that's kind of my sweet spot of who I work with. I also work in nutrigenomics as well. So looking at the genetics of our nutrition and lifestyle choices and making a more personalized nutrition plan.
I love that. Okay. Well, I feel like most of our listeners are in their 40s and beyond, and a lot of women are going through perimenopause or they're menopausal. And I think the one thing that we're always looking for more information on is how can we achieve better health. And I think one of the things that I love that people are talking about more is muscle and the brain. And I think that is something that is so important, and trying to figure out how we can do that, how we can protect our brains. I mean, let's start with the brain, because I feel like that's really important. In my family, I had a grandmother who had Alzheimer's disease, and it's very interesting as a kid, I didn't realize how off she was nutritionally. It makes so much sense now as I look back, but that's just something, that disease is not something that I would want for anyone. So tell us a little, let's start with that. What can we start doing to protect ourselves?
Yeah. And it's so interesting you brought up your grandmother, because that is what I hear from my patients. Many of us have a why that is associated with what we don't want to become, what we saw. And it makes us really motivated. And that's especially true for women. So let's just start there. When women go through perimenopause, and definitely through menopause, when we start losing estrogen, we have changes within the body that impact both our brain and our heart, which of course are really connected. Okay. If we think about from the vascular system, things like that. You kind of made the comment gosh, I didn't know how off my grandmother was. Right. And I think though, when we're younger, even if our grandmother is off, we're just that's my Nana. She's off. Right. And we don't think about changing behavior then. But Alzheimer's really can start 20, 30, 40 years before you can start getting symptoms. So the earlier we start with trying to protect our brain, the better. Okay. So there's a few things. Number one, let's just start with like nutrient density. We can look at brain health as what we choose to include in the diet and then what we choose not to include. So if we look at the MIND diet, for example, which is basically the Mediterranean Dash Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay, that's what it stands for. It's a combination of Dash and Mediterranean diet. We have very, very clear data that having very colorful fruits and vegetables, having a limited amount of red and red processed meat, really avoidance of alcohol, all of those things, lots of leafy greens, all of those things help to protect the brain and oxidative stress that can occur that eventually could lead to dementia. Obviously, Alzheimer's is just one type of dementia, but there are many different types of dementias. So that's kind of number one, right? Like I always tell my patients, like, when we get older, we can't afford to snack on gummy bears. And the reason for that is because we have to get the most bang for our nutritional buck. Like when you have a meal, when you have a snack, you have to make sure that that meal or snack has some sort of benefit to your health span and your overall longevity, right? So we no longer can kind of have more fun with food, although that's going to happen sometimes too. But we always have to be very deliberate about what we are putting on our plate, what we are choosing to have. Other things to kind of look at, certain nutrients, things like that. You know, there was a large study that came out a few months ago, and they looked at the brains of women who had died from Alzheimer's. And one common theme they found in these women is that they all had very little to no circulating omega-3s. So omega-3s is one thing that I made sure all of my female patients are getting enough of. And it's not just like, hey, let's pop a supplement if we don't have fish. It's also about testing, right? If you go in integrative functional circles, those people are testing for your circulating DHA and EPA. So what are those omega levels? And let's make sure we have them in a really normal format. We're not too low on that. Magnesium, zinc, vitamin D, B vitamins in general, all really important. And I would say for the most part, we can get all of these through food. Vitamin D, not so much. So just, making sure we're getting those nutrients and then avoidance of things like sugar, like alcohol, obviously smoking. Smoking is a huge risk factor for dementia. Those are all really important factors. Getting really good exercise, right? So I know we're going to talk about muscle, but like making sure your heart rate is up every single day. So like HIIT training could be something like that. And then really looking at some other lifestyle factors. So meditation, sauna use, all of those things have been associated with helping protect female brains, male brains as well. But we've got studies really showing the benefit to females.
I love that the sauna has shown to help with brain. I haven't heard that before with brain health.
Yeah. And it makes sense because when you sit in a sauna, you're kind of sweating out the toxins. So that's one thing that sometimes we can't avoid, right? We might not be able to avoid where we live. And that when we go take a walk, we are walking in an area that has a lot of pollution. Pollution is a huge risk factor for dementia. So a sauna is one of those things that can kind of help sweat it out. Now, most of the studies have been done on Finnish sauna. So the sauna where you put the water on the rocks and you see it steam. But we are also looking at, we think there are some benefits that, and we'll probably see further studies on, ultra red light sauna, that type of thing that's becoming so much more popular as well. I think sometimes we also don't think about our supplements. I mentioned omega-3s as a really important supplement, vitamin D. Creatine is coming out as being just a huge benefit in general, but for women, we are seeing some really interesting data looking at how creatine is actually helping to protect the brain as we age and kind of help protect it against, some of the damage that can be done over decades and decades of bad decisions.
Yeah, I want to talk about creatine in a minute because that's something I literally just talked about on my podcast last week. Something that I finally started using in my regimen
So
that I
good.
hadn't been before, but I want to talk before we get there. I did not know you could, I mean, this makes sense, but like testing, I never thought to ask to test for omega 3s in my blood work, because I feel like that is such a big thing. We've heard for a long time, like you need your omegas for a healthy brain. That's something that we've heard a long time, but it's so interesting that you can go in and test for that and make sure that
Yeah.
you're getting enough. Like what are the recommendations? I mean, especially as a dietitian for a woman of, in their 40s plus, what do you recommend, like as far as servings go, and what type of fish do you recommend? Like give us some ideas there so we can have some examples of what to do, because I know supplementation is it, could be important, but like what do we start with if we want to just go the food route?
Yeah, of course, of course. So from the food route, you're really going to look for high omega-3 fish. So, but you also want fish that's like lower in mercury. So you don't want to have too much tuna. You want to focus on like lake trout, wild salmon. Those are probably going to be the two best sources in terms of bioavailability. We also have the plant-based route. So we could do walnuts, we could do chia seed, we could do flax seed. All of those things help to boost the levels. So I'm not trying to imply that, hey, you have to have the fish, but most of the studies are done on the fish. There has been some really positive studies on walnuts as well, but the fish have the EPA and the DHA, right? And I always say that, like, if you're like, gosh, I really want the fish type, but I don't want to eat fish, or I'm a vegan, algae oil and algae can be really
Mm.
beneficial as well. I mean, think about this. So, when fish are born, you got the little fish eggs, they are not born as high omega-3 creatures, but they grow and they eat algae. And so they eat algae, they then get omega-3s, then we eat the fish, and then we get the omega-3s. So really it's all derived in some capacity from the algae. So algae is another source that could be very rich in getting enough. And you're looking at around 2.5 servings. I mean, I know the half sounds ridiculous, but that's like what the official recommendations are when we look at, how much fatty fish should you be having every week. 2.5 servings, wild salmon, lake trout, sardines. I know a lot of people don't eat sardines, right?
Yeah.
But sardines would be another good source too, and they're low on the food chain, so they would have the least amount of mercury.
And they're so affordable. I'm telling you, I can eat almost anything. I cannot do sardines.
Yeah.
My family does them. I'm like, I'm so jealous because you can get a big thing of sardines at
Yeah.
Costco. It's such a
Yeah.
good price, and I can't do it. But I love trout. I think that is like
Great.
one of
Yeah.
it's you can get it at the grocery store now, and I feel like it's so underrated. I feel like trout is so underrated and it's so good.
Completely.
It doesn't feel like the fishy if you're not like a fishy type of,
Yeah.
person. It's so good. But yeah, so I thank you for that for the fish recommendations. And I feel like sometimes my favorite quick lunch, if I don't have something prepared, is I open a can of salmon and I eat it with seaweed, and
Oh,
it's
cool.
like 5 minutes and I have lunch, and it's like I'm getting
So good.
some. It's so good, it's so easy. And I wanted to also mention about the algae oil. I just saw that for the first time, and people are cooking with algae oil, and I am like, I had never heard of that. But have you used the oil in your kitchen, and like what do you think of it?
I actually haven't used the oil to cook. Uh,
Okay.
if we're talking about brain health, it's like, man, it's really hard to beat the studies on the polyphenol content of extra virgin olive oil. So
Sure.
extra virgin olive oil is really where I would stay. And then if I'm going to go a little higher smoke point, I'll probably go with avocado oil.
Hmm.
But I have recommended algae oil to many of my patients who just say, oh, I don't want the fish burps, or I'm kind of scared of fish oil because I don't know where it's derived from. So there's kind of that fear. So the algae I'm more comfortable with. So it's something that I recommend in my practice, but I haven't actually cooked with it myself.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. Yeah. Cause I saw it for the first time online and I was like, that's so cool. So interesting. I've never used it, but thought I'd ask. Okay. So I want to talk about creatine next,
Hmm.
because you had mentioned that for the brain. And one thing I like to say when I was talking about my experience with creatine is that it's been I feel like targeted to men.
Totally. Yeah.
For my husband has been using creatine for years, and I was like, that's for men who want to get big. I
Right.
do not want to get big. That's the opposite
Right.
of what I want to get. And that's just like been the marketing toward it. And recently I have been learning because of all the data that's coming out about the brain health, and like that's really perked me up. And so can you please share why creatine is something that we're talking about more and more, for especially for women, because I feel like that's newer, and the brain benefit of that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting what you were just saying, Jess, because I wrote an article. I write a nutrition column for the Today Show, and I wrote a recent article about creatine specifically for women. And I started off by talking about like when we as women like imagine creatine, we're thinking of the bros in the gym, and like they got like the tank top on and they're ripped, and that's what we think of, right? So you're right. We're evolving now because we're seeing so much more data on it. In terms of women, though, so let's think about this loss of estrogen. And by the way, a loss of estrogen after menopause is a huge risk factor for Alzheimer's and dementia. We think there's about a 10-year wiggle room. There's different studies on this, 5 to 10, but most people are landing on 10, of potential hormone replacement therapy where women could take estrogen to protect their brain for a 10-year period after menopause. So that's kind of a separate issue. But when we think about women and creatine, number one, our body does not make enough creatine, right? It's stored in the muscles, but we don't make enough of it, and we don't get enough of it through food. It's just not, it's like vitamin D in the sense that like, you could kind of be eating some of these foods till your eyes pop out. It's not going to boost your creatine level. So we do need to look at a supplement for it. Because of dietary choices, women tend to have less of it circulating than men. Okay. In terms of the data though, where we have seen is benefits in actual cognition. So actually looking at the cognitive effects of being able to think clearer, have more clear thinking. There was a study looking at resilience in women in terms of brain health after sleep deprivation. And if you're perimenopausal or postmenopausal, I'm a woman who's been in menopause now for a year and a half. I can tell you like, man, I would like one day where I was 25 again in my sleep, right? I just put my head on the pillow and 8 hours later, I just wake up, and I just never knew that one day I'd either couldn't fall asleep or I'd be boiling, or I'd wake up at 3:30 in the morning and be like, please let me go to sleep. Right. So sleep deprivation has a lot of negative effects, and we know creatine can help offset that as well. We know creatine plays a role, again, based on the studies, and all of this is in my article, really kind of looking at reproductive health as well. But the muscle mass is a huge one because, again, as we get over our 30s, right, it's not just our 40s, but it is our 30s, we start losing like 3 to 8% of muscle every year if we do nothing about it. And what do we replace that muscle with? It's fat. So that then starts to increase our comorbidities, our risk for things like heart disease, like dementia, like certain cancers. So creatine plays such a huge role looking at ATP production and energy production within the muscle, that it's not about bulking up. It's about really getting to the point where we can look at maintaining what muscle we have and helping to grow the muscle, or build the muscle to keep us strong, help us to avoid things like sarcopenia, things like that as we age. So I think from the muscle and brain perspective, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. It's just as important as all the conversations we're having about protein.
Yeah, I think that's so great. I heard a podcast talking about a study in jet lag with creatine, and it was like, it goes back to the sleep, where the sleep is improved, but they were saying like you take more than normal amount, like more than the serving size of creatine after you've been traveling, and your jet lag goes way down.
Yeah.
And I think that's so true too. Like what you're making me laugh about being in the 20s and having sleep, because I will have it. I make jokes all the time. We talk about sleep all the time on my podcast, but I'll be like, I'll have one night and I didn't sleep right. And I'm like physically ill. I'm like, how, this isn't even, I still slept 7 hours. Like what is happening? It's like the quality of the sleep is affected.
Yeah.
And you're just like, your body just cannot cope with that as you get older. It's just so much tougher on us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for me, again, as a postmenopausal woman, I'm taking creatine in the morning. So I'm taking it like 90 minutes before I'm going to do weightlifting, that kind of thing. Obviously, if we pair creatine with weightlifting, it makes a huge difference. But then I'm also taking it in the evening hours too. So I'm getting a little bit of a higher dose in because I also want the brain benefit. We also have differences in creatine. So we have data looking at creatine HCl as being very bioavailable. You actually need a lot less of it to be able to
Hmm.
absorb it. Less bloating, less water retention, all those things that I know patients come to me and say, well, I don't want to do creatine because I heard like you retain water or you bloat. But we don't see that as much with creatine HCl, and the bioavailability is what is most important. So kind of the less is more approach, which again, we're always learning. We are always looking at new data and how that data relates to that personalized nutrition plan. So for me, as a dietitian, what I recommend to my patients, I'm going creatine HCl in the morning. I'm doing it again in the evening hours, looking at a bit of a higher dose because my why is prevention of Alzheimer's and dementia. Everything I do is based on that goal and avoidance of my brain just kind of degrading and getting those plaques and tangles that are synonymous with Alzheimer's.
Okay, I want to talk about this a little bit deeper because that was next on my question for you and you got it ahead of me. The timing. So I love that you're mentioning this.
Mm-hmm.
When you take creatine, did you say 90 minutes before your workout?
Take about 90 minutes before my workout,
Okay.
just to make sure that it has time to, I guess, activated might not be the medical term, but activated within my muscles, giving me the muscles, the energy that my muscle is needing to utilize a really good resistance training workout.
Got it. Okay. And then in the evening, tell me, are you using the same milligram or what, however you tell me how is it grams that you're using to measure and like how
Yeah.
many morning and night?
Yeah. So I'm using I'll use look at it. I clearly told you I was postmenopausal, but now you know that I'm older because I'm putting the glasses on. So like for me, like if I'm looking at my creatine, I've got my creatine in front of me. So this has 750 milligrams. I'm going to do a scoop of this. So that's like almost 1 gram, right? So again, you need like kind of the less is more
Right,
perspective.
right.
So I'm going to use 1 gram like in the morning time and then 1 gram again in the evening time. Again, if you're using other types of creatine, you're going to notice that you need a much higher dose. I was at a conference yesterday. It was like I never thought this would be the most fascinating conference, but it was. I was at the like a grocery store conference yesterday in Kansas City. Like it was just so cool, like to be at a grocery store like now I like went to the grocery store today and it's like my world was like changed. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
I know how long it took you to figure out what carts to buy now that I've been to this conference.
How
Anyway,
funny.
but we got into this whole conversation about creatine, and someone's like, "Well, that's like nothing, right?" But it's the type of creatine, so that is going to determine your dose a little bit differently. Just to kind of give you that disclaimer, if you're someone who's watching and you're taking a monohydrate, your dose is going to seem much higher. So. So I'm probably like, 1 gram in the morning, gram and the evening. So I keep it pretty equal. I don't have side effects. I don't have anything like that. I've seen, huge benefits in both myself and my patient base. Now, why do I do the second dose in the evening? That is for the brain. So if I was just maybe looking at, okay, just muscle, I'm just going to start off, maybe I would do that before my workout. And then I that would be it. But because there's such great data on the brain health, I'm going to boost the dose up a bit more.
Oh gosh, that's so good. I've never heard it being used like that. So I really appreciate that because I'm going to start doing that as well.
Ah, totally.
I remember when I first tried it, I did have a feeling of the bloating
Mhm.
and puffiness. And that is something I actually haven't had since. Like it was like the first time I tried to take it and I was like, no, 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 what's happening here? And I literally stopped using it for years. So, what would you say to people that are having that issue for women? I mean, could it possibly be like something that you just see in the beginning and then it goes away, or is that just case by case?
Well, I mean, I do think there's more likelihood to bloat just based on the studies in monohydrate, and less likely to do it for HCl, which is why I
Okay.
stick with an HCl version in my patient base. Now, again, if you get to the point where you start experiencing bloating and you're taking a monohydrate, you could switch versions, or you could maybe reduce the dose, or maybe like get a different brand. That could be another thing you would look at. I would look at a different option. I would go from a monohydrate to an HCl.
Okay.
Um, but you know, it's also a good point that we could talk about for hours, Jess, and that is the quality of the supplements we're choosing, right? So even like with fish oil, it's like fish oil A might be just an awful source, and fish oil B might be a great source. But the question is, how does the consumer know the difference? Right? Like we can't just look at the bottles and be like, well, this looks pretty good and this doesn't. So like looking at certifications, third party testing. So the quality of the supplements, whether it's fish oil, vitamin D, creatine, that is going to be huge as well. That's going to be huge as well. So I think that that makes just as much of a difference as your dose. There another study was just done that came out looking at probiotics and testing probiotics, and found out that like all these probiotics, like all the strains were dead by the time they tested them, right? But we're popping a pill that's not activated, not alive. So again, I think that's why it's so important to work with a healthcare provider
Yeah.
that has the expertise and has the tools to be able to say, okay, if fish oil is what you're looking for, here's the 3 brands that we like. And we like them because of these testing mechanisms that they have been rigorously tested for. Right. So that's kind of another thing to really pay attention to.
It's such a good point. I had a guest on last week who was basically like, I'd rather you take a great quality fish oil, this is specifically about fish oil,
Yeah.
than even bother with the inexpensive ones, because it's not even just like the probiotic thing that's so frustrating because they are
Yeah.
so expensive, and here you are spending all this money for something that could be not working, or even worse, harmful. And that's just so frustrating. But
Yeah.
these companies have to have a little bit of ethics to do that extra testing and make sure they're putting out quality, because I know there's not a lot of enforcement a lot of times. So it's really a good point. And I think if we're going to be spending our money on something, we want to make sure that it's actually going to work.
Absolutely. And I think the thing here too is that like I think so, like some of my patients are like, well, this has got to be good because I spent $50 on it. It can't be as good as this $7 one. And that's just not the case.
Right.
Right. So I think like looking at like US Pharmacopoeia, looking at Consumer Lab, getting third party regulatory places to test these things are really important, because to your point, this is an unregulated industry. So we don't have the same FDA oversight that we do in the pharmaceutical industry that kind of protects us from these things. It's in some ways the Wild West.
Yes. Oh, it's just good for everybody to be aware of that. So I wanted the one last area, we talked a little bit about muscle and the brain, but I
Yeah.
know another like area that we need to be more vigilant about as we age is our bones. And like, as a dietitian, can you give us any tips here? What should we be on the lookout for? What should we have top of mind when it comes to the health of our bones, and why?
Yeah. Well, I think number one, right now, most females are getting insurance coverage at 60 for bone density testing. And I always start around 50, 55, especially for patients that I have on GLPs, for without a doubt. And that's like a third of my patients,
Mm,
is saying like, hey, maybe contact your insurance company and see if you can get coverage to get bone density testing a little bit earlier. Let's just see, especially if there's a family history, your mom, your grandmother had osteopenia or osteoporosis. So that's kind of number one. When do you test as a woman? Number two is, of course, calcium, but like we absorb most calcium before 30. Not to say we shouldn't have calcium later, but that's the sweet spot. And it's like, what's the phrase? Waste is wasted on the young, right? We don't think about these things. So calcium's important, but also looking at weight bearing exercise. So doing like resistance training, going for walks, things like that, getting your body out and moving is a huge benefit to our bone health. So I think those are other things we need to look at, is kind of the important aspects. When do we test? Do we have to wait to 60 to test? What does our diet look like and how much exercise are we getting? Three really important factors, because not every woman wants to take calcium. There's a little bit of controversy with whether or not certain calcium supplements could potentially lead to calcification in the arteries and lead to a greater risk for heart disease. So, we have to be careful on how we are obtaining our calcium. Now, there's some new calcium options now that we know are more naturally derived. So they're coming from oyster, things like that. But I think we don't have enough data yet to show if they're as effective as the ones like calcium carbonate and citrate, which is typically the typical ones you're going to see. Movement is the key for women at any age, right? For so many benefits, but for your bones, for your muscles, like, we have to move every day. We can't be like, yeah, I work out 5 days a week. That's great. But take a walk on those other 2 days. But do something.
Yeah. And movement, I don't know if you mentioned this in the beginning, but when it comes to our brains, isn't that important too for the brain?
Yeah. Moving, having blood flow in the brain be moving is a huge component. So again, if you look at, there was a very big study. It was looking at, it was in the Lancet. It was 2 summers ago, and it looked at both genetic risk factors. So APO4 for Alzheimer's. So you can have 1 to 2 copies of APO4. One copy, you are like about a 25% higher risk of developing Alzheimer's. 2 copies, I believe it's about 80%. And so they looked at what are the 14 factors that, even if you just have 1 copy, can help prevent dementia from ever occurring or delaying it. And movement was a huge factor, right? It was just as important as diet. So making sure you're getting exercise, not being sedentary. Cleveland Clinic has a program called the Women's Alzheimer's Movement, and it is just for women who have some sort of risk factor. They have a first-degree relative. They have 1 to 2 copies of the APO4 gene, and it's an amazing program. And they will not they won't be quiet about how important it is to exercise. And thank goodness for that, right? Because exercise is just as important as diet when it comes to protecting our brain. Just think about blood moving through your system and think about the anti-inflammatory effects, right? So looking at C-reactive protein, our level of inflammation, people with lower C-reactive protein tend to have a lower risk of dementia. Exercise is probably one of the best things to lower that. So those are all things to look at. But again, like, if you're like, hey, my diet's great, but I love having my glass of wine every night and I'm just kind of a couch potato, but my diet's good, you're still a huge risk for dementia.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's good to know the importance of that, because I think a lot of people that aren't into fitness and they didn't grow up exercising or, things like that, and they maybe have a better diet, not having that fitness component is so tricky. And like you said, it's risky, and it doesn't have to be crazy. I mean, going out and doing the walks like you're talking about, and most people can go out and do that. And then you also recommend the strength, the weight bearing exercises, and that's for great bone health too.
Aerobic, I think, aerobic and anaerobic are they're so important. And again, like, you don't have to run a marathon. Like, even if you just take a walk after dinner and that walk is 15 minutes, like, there are multiple studies looking at blood sugar management from taking a walk after dinner. Right. And it's not like, so you don't, I think people get overwhelmed by it. Like, oh my gosh, how many miles a day do I have to walk? Well, why don't you just start with 15 minutes? That's better than the 0 minutes that you've been doing. And you just build up from there. But any movement is going to be key.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. I remember, like, back to my grandma, she just did not have any movement in her life, and like a lot of couch, we watched a lot of Golden Girls, which is very sweet, but we did not get out, and we did not get moving at all, like when I would be at her house. And it's like interesting to learn all of these things as an adult, because there was a lot of missed opportunities. But is there anything else that you feel like the women listening should take away from this? Because I know it might seem like a lot, like to implement a lot of these things when you're maybe not there yet.
Sure.
And like what you said with the walk, don't worry about getting 10,000 steps in right away. Just do that little walk after dinner. Is there anything else that you can share with them?
Yeah, I would say, we also have to like give ourselves a break sometimes. So like, yes, for your brain, is it ideal to never have alcohol? Absolutely. That is the ideal scenario. Alcohol shrinks the brain. Okay. So
Yeah.
that's ideal. However, if you're like, you know what, every other Friday night I get together with my girlfriends and I have 2 glasses of wine, that's okay. So when we look at the studies and we look at the data, and this is true for consumption of ultra processed foods as well, things like that, um, you know, there's always a dose dependency. So we also have to understand that like every once in a while we might have a glass of wine, or you know what, we might have a peanut butter cup, and that's okay. If that is 5% of the time, to beat ourselves up and to stress and to just have really negative self-talk, that could be more damaging to the brain than the actual peanut butter cup that you had. Right. So I just think like as women, we need to give ourselves a break. We might not always be perfect. We shouldn't aim for perfection. We should aim for progress every single day. And just knowing that not every day is going to be great, especially in the beginning. Right. So I think like that's kind of the takeaway. Your blood sugar, your lipids, your weight, that's going to make a huge difference in your overall longevity and your health span. But how you interact day in and day out, how often you get into nature, things like that, stress plays a huge role too. So don't stress if you have a frozen pizza one night and you eat the whole thing. Okay. Like that could happen. That could happen one night. But if it's not happening every night, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Okay. Based on like what we're seeing in the data. So give yourselves a break to look at the right supplements versus food, vitamin D, creatine. Those are the big ones, fish oil, maybe. But like, know your numbers, know all of those things. Chill out on the stress. Sometimes the stress is much worse than anything else.
I love that message. We've talked about that before on the podcast, and because I've personally been in that space of like it's got to be perfect, and I feel like those were the times where my stress was higher. That is damaging. So I love the message. I thank you so much for coming on. Please tell everybody where they can learn more about you or find you.
Yes, you can go to my Instagram account, which is Fuel Well with Krissy, Krissy, or my website, KristinKirkpatrick.com, Kristin spelled with an I.
Perfect. And I'll link the creatine that you use. Tell us which brand that you like.
Concrete is the brand that I use that I recommend to my patients. And it's awesome and it tastes awesome. And if you're using other types of creatine, I would stop and go with an HCl.
Yeah, that's such a good, and that was something that I've never heard anybody like break down the different types. So I appreciate that. That's really helpful. And thank you for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it was such an honor and a privilege.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please subscribe and review so we can reach more people who want to learn to glow alongside us. See you next time.